everybody. Thanks for coming out Thursday night. My name is Bill Cavanaugh. I'm the director of the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology here at DePaul. It's a center with a very grand name. I was thinking of maybe calling up the Cardinal and asking if he can give us the Cardinal's mansion now that he's not going to be using it center, but I don't think that would be in the spirit of the thing. I'm very pleased tonight to introduce Father Daniel Pilario. Danny's a Vincentian and is staying with us for a few months as one of our visiting research fellows at the center, and staying with the Vincentians in Manila. He is the dean of the St. Vincent School of Theology at Adamson University, which is another Vincentian university in Manila, and he's also professor of theology there. His many accomplishments. Danny is, although he looks quite young, he's already one of the most accomplished Asian theologians in the Catholic world, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot more from him as the years go on. His book is called Back to the Rough Grounds of Praxis. He got his PhD at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium and has published widely in many international journals. All of that can be read on the sheet that you found on the seats, but what also ought to be said is that Danny is someone who is a kind of fundamentally kind, good person with a great sense of humor as well, and he walks the walk. So when he talks about the garbage dump in the title of the talk, it's a place that he's been and has ministered to people there, and he's a kind of person that makes his way between the academic world and the world where people are suffering. So, will you please help me in welcoming Father Danny to go?
Thanks, Bill, for the kind introduction. I'd like to thank the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology for inviting me into a research fellowship here at DePaul for 3 months now. I hope to be out of here by winter. I would also like to thank my Vincentian converts at the Vincentian residents who welcomed me into their very beautiful home in these 3 months that I am here. I have actually written my text so that I would not speak here forever, and I would keep to my time. Most of the time I would be reading from my text. The subtitle written on the flyers that you have received it reads thus: The Rough Grounds and Theological Method. So before I start, let me share with you the rough grounds from where I stand. Oh, by the way, no, okay, this comes from the rough ground. Okay, for those who like outlines, this is the way that I would proceed. For those who don't like outlines, disregard the slide. So I would like to start from the rough grounds where I stand. That's Payatas. I am a professor of theology, and for most part of the week, I teach seminarians, sisters, and lay people, check papers, do research, write articles like most of you do. But on weekends, I help my Vincentian converts in this parish of Payatas, which is the biggest dump site in Manila today. I have been assisting there for around 12 years now, since I finished my doctoral dissertation. First, I was invited there to be of help in the pastoral care of the parishioners, to celebrate masses, to bless the dead, give seminars, meetings, organize meetings, etc. Later, I began to realize that it is not mainly I who was helping them. In fact, it was they who were helping me make sense of my priesthood and my theology. but that is going ahead of the story. Let me first introduce you to Payatas. There is no actual census done at the moment in Payatas, but the estimates give you around 40 to 50,000 people living around a 22-hectare dump site facility. When on the Sunday Mass, no one would really know if someone is a garbage scavenger or not. They're wearing their Sunday's best, and you could not distinguish which one is which. But on ordinary days, they are in this dump site facility taking out for a living. On an ordinary day, for instance, a scavenger goes home with $7 to $10 in his pocket after having sold the garbage that he has collected. On a lucky day, if you get a gold necklace, and there were some who did, you get like $30 to $40, but that happens only in a lifetime of a scavenger. When the Vincentian first came to Payatas, like 25 years ago, life was really hard. I was there when we started it. We gave missions there. The roads were not paved. It was mud all over, and the odor of the stinking garbage literally penetrates your skin. So that when you have taken shower, it takes like 5 showers to take it out. And if you get out of Payatas, it stinks so much that when you go to a theater nearby, they would smell you. That's how difficult life is at the moment. Today, the situation is better, but the flies still abound all over the place. So aside from the traditional parish work, the Vincentians also administer many social services. For instance, child learning center programs for the elderly, savings mobilization, community health services, housing programs, cooperatives, and many others. I have received a call last week, and there was the community nurse who was working in Payatas with us like 10 years ago, and she promised me that she is coming. I don't know if Madel is around. I think she will be coming later. For instance, these are parts of our services, community health service programs, we have housing programs, etc. There was one program which I fondly remember, and I would like to relate with you. We had once a water facility and a very small swimming pool for children next to the garbage heap. Here, mothers can leave their children while they work, and young boys and girls can take showers after the day in the garbage before going home and taking the public transportation. You need to be refreshed before doing that. After some time, the garbage company decided to expand the heap, and the swimming pool was the first to go. Several years after, just last year, the chapel where we celebrate Mass also had to go to give space to the garbage. So now we have moved somewhere else, a little bit farther, because the garbage needs our chapel. After Sunday Masses, people invite me to their small houses for some celebrations, be it birthday parties or wedding anniversaries. But I was also asked to bless the dead, some of them very beautiful children in makeshift cardboard coffins who died of diarrhea or lung problem, illnesses otherwise curable with minimum medical intervention, but which are not available in the community. The Payatas situation may be of interest to many fields. For instance, this audience may be of different interest. It could be interesting to pastoral intervention, community organizing, ecological sustainability, urban planning, etc. You can go there and try to reflect on it. But for a theologian like me who shuttles between the dump site and the classroom, I am led to ask a very simple question. How do these rough grounds affect the way I do theology? think that is a very important question. For instance, how do the questions and painful lives of these people affect the way I think about God, about salvation, about morality, and everything like that? Far from being an abstract question, this question spells life and death for millions of people in the margins. I am not only talking of Payatas, I am talking of 3.8 billion people, which is literally half of the world's population, who lives on $2.5 a day according to the latest UN survey. So the situation of Payatas is not alone. It's half of the world's population. If the church still wants to walk the way of Jesus, I think, and I ask, it needs to listen to them because their lives alone already pose painful questions to the kind of theology that we do and to the kind of salvation that Jesus is supposed to bring. That is why this quotation from Ludwig Wittgenstein, I don't know him very well, but I like his quotation. He says, "We have got onto slippery ice where there is no friction, and so in a certain sense, the conditions are ideal. But also just because of that, we are unable to walk. We want to walk, so we need friction." Back to the rough grounds. Though Wittgenstein was referring to the crystalline purity of logic that does not work in real life, I am transposing its relevance to theology. The academe, which is the education of many of us, and our theories do not display real friction with actual real life and death consequences. For instance, in the academe, we can dissect issues from left to right, from right to left, from top to bottom, from bottom to top, and we debate endlessly until we die. Many of these do not work in the rough grounds like Payatas. And if the church wants to walk, we have to be back to the rough grounds, because the rough lives of these people pose painful questions to the way we do science, to the way we do theology, to the way we do philosophy and ministry. So let me mention two painful questions, at least for now, which I encountered in Payatas. First, there was a big debate in the Synod about communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. You are aware of this. In the end, it did not also get the needed majority votes, they say. But from the perspective of Payatas, one actually wonders what the big issue is all about. I remember the leaders in our parishes, in our basic ecclesial communities, and my friends who were there. Most of them had only civil marriages because a church marriage is too expensive and the requirements are onerous. Since we do not have divorce law in the Philippines, some of those who had earlier marriages that did not work will never have the possibility to marry the present partners at all. They are cohabitating, in the words of the documents, cohabitation. They are cohabitating not because they want to know first whether they are compatible or not, as in the first world countries, but because they had no choice. But these are committed couples. They have responsibly taken care of their children. Some of them are grandparents now. So the law of graduality or gradualness, which people are talking about in the Synod, may be a good thing, but it is present and it is being presently contemplated by progressive theologians. But I was asking, is it their intention? Is it in their intention? A movement from civil to church marriage, or a planned progress from cohabitation to receiving the sacrament? I answer, no, not even. For many people on the ground, cohabitation is all that they have because all other avenues are closed to them. As if the pain of survival is not heavy enough, the church still reinforces guilt on the consciences of these otherwise faithful couples by restricting their participation in the church ministry. For instance, you could not serve as a lay minister because you are not married in the church, etc., and restricting their participation in the sacraments. To be honest, for many of the couples that I know, they do not bother themselves anymore about this thing. And they keep on going to church, receiving the sacraments, and doing ministry. They did not ask me about it. I also did not ask about it. Everyone's welcome. Because they are saying, if the church does not accept my situation, I hope God understands me. Now I am asking myself as I hear this, is this the kind of callous church that I want to serve? Another question, painful question in Payatas is liturgy. In a recent article that I wrote, I tried to analyze the direction of the magisterium's document on the liturgy from 1980s up to our times. What I see are three recognizable directions. One, the emphasis on sacrifice, the grants from Benedict, from John Paul II to Benedict. Liturgical centralization, that everything has to be approved in Rome, even the kind of chalice that you have to use. And Eucharistic amazement. To give, I don't know what that really means, but to give us an example of their concerns, I'll give you some enumerations, some of them bordering on the ridiculous. Preference for the Latin language and Gregorian chant, facing the east, ad orientem, the reverential silence in the Mass, Eucharistic adoration, details on how to wear the stoles and the chasuble. There is one number there that it says that the stole should be worn inside the chasuble. They have spent all these prints in order to say this. Anyway. And what types of chalices to use. I was thinking how all these concerns of the encyclicals fit the masses we celebrate in Payatas when the noise of the dump trucks and bulldozers compete with the singing of the children's choir. Or the blessing of the chalice during the epiclesis, consecration, also doubles as a gesture for driving away the flies which are contesting to get into the sweet chalice, the sweet wine in the chalice. You know what? Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I am not. And the flies have gone there earlier than the driving away. Thus, people on the ground could not really care less about the recent crazy debate on the English translation of the Eucharist, whether it should be the Lord be with you or the Lord be with your spirit. Or in another part, to invite Jesus to enter under my roof does not really resonate for the people who have no roofs over their head. Now you see how real is the disconnect between church language and the people of the ground. Many people on the ground do not really have time for these debates. They can only hope that the church is there for them when they need it. But if it is not there, they're very creative. They look for God somewhere else. Maybe in their popular religions, which is not approved by the church, Pentecostal groups, or maybe in the garbage. Who knows where they find God? In one of those big conferences that we organized in the Philippines, we asked some leaders of these communities on what they can tell the bishops who are present during that conference from their side. What do they want to say to the bishops? And in summary, this woman, who is the leader of that chapter, she told me, and leaders like her told me, Father, please tell the bishop not to be too strict. The poor feels that the church is a rigid, legalistic, and closed institution. In another forum on sexually violated women, we invited some victim survivors to be a resource person. And one rape victim shared her story. And she said something like this: on the day that she was raped, or in the day that she wanted to get out of that situation, she ran to the church. I don't know what time is that during the day, and the church was closed. So there's nowhere else that she can go. She went to the cemetery because she thought she would be safe there. I think the rapists would not go as far as the cemetery. And when when she went to the cemetery, she read these tombstones with this R.I.P. behind their names. And she doesn't know English, of course, and she was thinking, R-I-P, rape. Ah, oh my goodness, they were all raped and they are all dead by now. Because she thought that rape is the same as rape. And she told herself, thank you, Lord, at least I'm alive. I was really thinking when I heard her, she was joking, but no, she was serious. And at the end of the session, she told us, can you please leave the church open? I was thinking to myself, what an irony, she found God alive in the cemetery because the church is closed. I know she was talking about the physical church, of course, but metaphorically speaking, the same closed mentality is actually true. And my little contribution to this debate is to discern also the closed outlook present in our theological methods. If I'm going to summarize what I would say, it is this. It is not only our churches and mentalities which are closed, but also the way we do theology. It is these closed methods that make the church deaf both to the people's voices and to the whispers of the Spirit. In the end, we have a dead church, so closed and so dead that God has decided to move to the cemetery. This necessitates a discussion on theological method. I know it is a discussion which can be very technical and jargon-filled and which makes most people hate theology. And since this is a mixed audience, I would like to make this session as understandable as possible for all. For those who are interested in the jargon, I can refer you to some books and some articles that I have written somewhere. In the theological field, I try to identify two famous methods of doing theology that these are contemporaries, but I think which are also representative of the methods today. If you want, in theology, there is a debate between narrative theology and correlative theology, between post-liberal theology and David Tracy, between La Nouvelle theology and the transcendental theology of Karl Rahner. All these debates can be, in one way or the other, represented by these two methods. One modern and the other postmodern. The first is radical orthodoxy, the second is liberation theology. Much has been written on both subject matters up to now, and I'm choosing two great authors that provided methodological reflection on their respective movements. The first is John Milbank, who first came to prominence with his book, Theology and Social Theory. He is a professor of the University of Nottingham. And the second is Clodovis Boff. He is a Brazilian priest of the Servite order, the brother of the more famous and controversial Leonardo Boff, whose methodological work, Theology and Praxis, is one of the most comprehensive work in the method of liberation theology up to now. We first start with John Milbank. Milbank's work is considered a tour de force of systematic theology and cited by the Church Times as 100 best Christian books, one of the 100 best Christian books. Stanley Hauer was considered its second edition in 2006 as a bombshell, and Charles Taylor, the famous Charles Taylor in A Secular Age in 2007, aligns his work with Milbank. So this must be a famous work. Very much ahead of his time, at least in the theological field, Milbank was the one who first unmasked the meta-narrative of human and social sciences advocated advocated for its expulsion in theological discourse. He crusaded against many things. For instance, he is against secular politics, capitalist economy, sociology, dialectical philosophy, etc. Milbank is very erudite and prolific writer. It is impossible and unfair to summarize his work here. Let me just mention one objection that I find in his work. His method provides us with a closed theological structure. Milbank's project was intended to retrieve theology from its captivity by the social sciences. He thinks that in modern times, theology has been positioned, in one way or the other, hijacked by social theory. Therefore, theology, he thinks, suffers from false humility by refusing to criticize, by refusing to qualify, and by refusing to position other discourses. I think, even as this is necessary, Milbank also swings the pendulum to the other side of the spectrum. So much so that one of his critics think that Milbank is like helping a hero in quest of a stolen crown. Gerard Laughlin describes Milbank's work with these words: "Once upon a time, it was theology that wore the crown, theology that carried out most of the fundamental reading of all interpretations and all other social formations. Theology was the master narrative. Stolen by secular reason and worn as social theory, the master narrative is now sought by its earlier owner." That's the project of Milbank. Like all wars and crusades, Milbank has friends and enemies. For those in theology, Milbank's friends are Augustine, Blundell, de Lubac, and La Nouvelle Theology, and the others. On the side of the enemies are secular sciences and philosophies, from Marx to Weber, from Foucault to Nietzsche, and the theologies that use them, from Karl Rahner to liberation theologians. And like all wars, the enemies are demonized in order to bring out the morality of one's project. I think, in the end, Milbank thinks we do not need other sciences, social science, but also philosophy, because theology itself suffices. In his hands, theology has become a closed science. The title of the book is Theology and Social Theory. But what actually he means is theology is in itself a social theory. I was thinking, if we have closed our doors to dialogue with other sciences, because Christian theology is enough, how can we hear other voices different from our own? And Pope Francis is talking about the surprises of God. Surprises would not be there anymore. You know, when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, I happened to attend the conference by Milbank. It's one of the audience. And at the end of the open forum, during the open forum, I actually asked a question. I raised my hand and said, "Professor, I come from the Philippines. It's a very multi-religious situation, especially in the South. And if you're saying that Christian narrative is the only narrative viable in the world today, can you please tell me how will I say that to my Muslim neighbor?" And you know what he told me? He said, "That's not my problem, that's yours." I don't think Milbank remembers me, nor my question today. But his answer that night was a sign of how exclusive and dismissive a method like this is. You know, a refusal to dialogue. I don't know if some of you know Milbank, you can introduce him to me. The next guy is Bob. No? One of Milbank's considered opponent is liberation theology's foremost methodological work, Theology and Praxis by Clodovis Prop. Both wrote this work as his dissertation in the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium in 1976. Just about the time when the first generation of liberation theologians, Gutierrez, Asman, Segundo, Bonino, had to grapple with the churches, both left and right, with the ideologization of the faith. That faith has been ideologized by liberation theology. Ratzinger's document against liberation theology appeared in 1984. But the International Theological Commission already started to study liberation theology in 1974, just about the time that Boff was writing his dissertation. So we can thus understand Boff's concern. It is to institute a theological method to protect liberation theology from the incursion of ideologies, because that was the concern during the time. Boff's work is almost 500 pages, and it is also very difficult to understand, like Milbank. But simply put, it was a very technical elaboration of the See Judge Act process. For those of us familiar with basic ecclesial communities and young Christian workers movement, the See Judge Act is a handy methodology to reflect on the Word of God in context. There are three important questions. What is the situation? What does God tell us about the situation? And what do we need to do to transform the situation? I think that in short, this is what Boff was trying to do. Thus, in the end, we have a practical theology that does not deal with abstractions, but is really grounded in context, whatever that context is: poverty, injustice, oppression. But precisely this method is in danger of being vulnerable to ideological manipulation by its use of Marxist analysis. We have heard of how many communities were co-opted by communist parties, instrumentalized them towards the revolutionary agenda. That is true in Latin America, but that's also true in the Philippines, in India, and the others. So in order to avoid this danger, Boff's theological method took great pains that this is not going to happen. How did he do it? It's very complicated, but by adapting, I'll mention one, by adapting the notion of practice from a French philosopher, Louis Althusser. Now, what is practice? In Louis Althusser, he says, by practice in general, I shall mean any process of transformation of a determinate given raw material into a determinate product. A transformation effected by a determinate human labor using determinate means of production. In any practice thus conceived, the determinant moment is neither the raw material nor the product, but the practice in the narrow sense, the moment of the labor of transformation itself. Now, it seems very complicated and philosophical. If we are going to transpose this Althusserian principle into a theological theory, it spells something like this: the result of the social analysis from the ground serve as the raw material. The pastoral action shall serve as the product. But what is important is what the theologian does and uses in order to transform the raw materials into the product. In Boff's technical language, it is the content of the Christian faith, which also means revelation, doctrine, and dogmas. Therefore, applying it to our concerns, the voices of the people from the ground is the raw material, and in the Althusserian perspective, it's not important. Neither is the pastoral action. What is important is the act of theological production done by the theologian. And if you go back to the See Judge Act process, what is crucial is the second movement, the act of judging by the theologian and the Christian principles that he used. Now, I do not want to burden you with this technical language, but I felt it is necessary in order to make the conclusion at this point. Now, my conclusion is this: Milbank and Boff, theologians who find themselves in opposite sides of the theological spectrum, in fact possess a common weakness. The weakness is this: both enthrone the theologian as the ultimate arbiter of theological meaning at the expense of voices from the ground. Here you have two closed theological methods, because the only powerful person in the theological process is the theologian. The raw material is not important. neither is the brother, but the act of doing theology. You can ask me the question, so what do you propose to get out of those difficulties? I would like to mention that the alternative that I'm proposing is reflexive theology. I would like to enlist the help of some thinkers to give a voice to people on the rough grounds. It is in this presentation that we mention in passing three: Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist; Thomas Aquinas, a Dominican theologian; and Albert Einstein, a scientist. I was amazed at the convergence of these sciences. In a previous work, I have dealt with Bourdieu more or less in some 200 pages. I just want to single out one thing that he says. And he compares science versus practice, theory versus praxis. And he says, science has a time which is not that of practice. For the analyst, time disappears. Not only because the analyst cannot have any uncertainty as to what can happen, but also because he has time to totalize, that is, to overcome the effects of time. Now, here Bourdieu compares science and practice. Practice has a certain logic which is not accessible to science. Transposed to my problematic, people on the rough ground has a certain logic which is not accessible to the academician, to the scientist, to the theologian. Bourdieu talks about the feel for the game. For a player has a sense which is not present in the analyst of the game. A player in action has a sense which is not present in the coach who analyzes it after the game. For instance, the person engaged in practice, a sense of time is important. Its tempo, its irreversibility, its acceleration is important. And because the observer, the analyst, the academician stands outside the game, he does not really feel its urgency or its time. Now, in order to explain it, let's try to see the politics of gift giving. I would like to tell a story in order to explain this. When I was doing my PhD in Leuven, I was living in a house together with other students coming from different countries. One day, one student knocked at my door and she gave me the food that she cooked that night. I was very grateful. Thank you very much for sharing your food to me. I was also cooking, so after I cooked, I also knocked at her door and gave share of the food that I was cooking. And she was so upset. I said, what happened? And she said, why do you have to give too soon? And is there any problem? Yeah, there is a problem. Because you wanted to repay my gift. It's the point. The time between gift and return gift determines the character of the gift exchange. In my returning the gift too soon, I have in fact nullified the gift. Anthropologists talk about cycles of reciprocity, and they say that every gift should need a return gift. That's the view of the observer, because the view of the one on the ground makes time important in the process. I was looking at Albert Einstein, and like Ludwig Wittgenstein, I also do not understand him that much. But in a talk to Prussian Academy of Sciences in 1921, he said, as far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain. And as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality. So even mathematics, which has gained a reputation of being the most exact science, can never fully represent actual life, in the words of Einstein. I do not, which also means that mathematicians, scientists, philosophers, theologians can never really understand the experience of the man and woman on the street. Because in the words of Bourdieu, academics are infected with what he calls the scholastic point of view. What is this scholastic point of view? A certain disposition which is a product of leisurely universes, where people can seriously play or busily experiment with thought, freed as they are from uncertainty and urgency about tomorrow. Because their state of life, or in some countries, the state treasury provides for them. As you well know, skole, from where the word school comes from, is the Greek word for leisure, a location which takes us away from the world of practice. Now the last question is, what are the implications of this to theology? Let me mention two. Theological reflexivity and the role of praxis in theological method. If theory could not fully comprehend praxis, the first act of any theology is to acknowledge the limits of its language. Theology, therefore, needs to be modest and should bow to the experiences of people from the ground. This is what I call reflexive theologizing. You know, reflexivity has been around the academic field for some time now. Bourdieu's contribution to this discourse is to unmask the fallacies coming from our belonging to leisurely world of the scholar, of which the academic field is just one example. In concrete, Bourdieu's framework alerts us to the fact that the bishop, the pastor, the theologian, the pastoral worker, even the community organizer can never really comprehend the experiences of people on the ground. For at the end of the day, even as we are there, we go home to our sturdy homes and well-heated rooms, to our air-conditioned classrooms and libraries. While these people had to worry all night if the roofs will still be there when they wake up. That is totally large scale. Some call theological reflexivity humility, others call it theological modesty. But being a personal virtue or desirable attitude of any theologian or academic for that matter, reflexivity is a structure rooted in the epistemological dimensions of our being human. In short, this means that in order to be true to our humanity, there is no other way but to be reflexive. This brings me to Thomas Aquinas, who at the end of his life, he hung up all his writing instruments and told his assistant, Reginald, I could not write anymore because all that I have written seems strong. Aquinas has written 85 works in philosophy, 80 sermons, etc. But at the end of his life, he did not write anything. There are many interpretations to this event in the life of Aquinas, but from the perspective of what I'm saying here, Thomas seems to realize that theology is just straw in the face of the real. It's nothing in the face of the divine. The event points to the limits of theological language and all our scientific language for that matter. Which brings me to the second point. If theological theory is limited, we therefore need to open our methods not only to the workings of the Spirit, but also to the voices of praxis from the grounds. And this is not a difficult assertion to make and conclusion to make in a Vincentian university like this. Because for St. Vincent, the voice of God is in fact found in the voices of the poor in the rapids. If we could not really fathom what is happening there, just as we cannot fathom God in our lives. Therefore, we need to be open. The voices, the sentiments, reflections, and praxis from the rough grounds are necessary to develop, change, modify, or subvert the way we have formulated our doctrines, our dogmas, and our beliefs. This is not a new thing, because theology has always been talking about sensus fidelium. But you know, when a doctrine is being challenged by the voices from the grounds, like it was in the Synod in Rome recently, the magisterium and the theologians alike close their doors and say, you know, the church is not a democracy, and doctrine is not about statistics, etc., etc. That is why I feel like ambivalent on the developments of that recent synod. On the one hand, all the bishops agree that they need to listen to people and their experience in difficulties in the families that they're going through. On the other hand, they're also saying, we do not intend to change the doctrine, even as people are saying we need to change it. So how do we measure sensus fidelium? And who decides what sensus fidelium is all about? I was thinking maybe my little proposal can help a little bit at least sort out where the ambivalence is coming from. And in order not to pay mere lip service to sensus fidelium, viable processes need to be set up in the church to deeply listen to the faithful. You know, the recent document, just this June 2014, entitled Sensus Fidelium, it says there in the second paragraph, in some cases it may indicate that certain decisions have been taken by those in authority without due consideration of the experience of the faithful, or without sufficient consultation of the faithful by the magisterium. Now, what instrument do they have? They suggested, the document suggested, there are diocesan synods and pastoral councils. And I was asking myself the question, who are there? Precisely, people from this college. How are the people in Payatas and people like them are represented in these structures? I was reading this document and I have hopelessly searched throughout the document where the poor, those coming from the rock grounds and in Payatas and elsewhere, can participate and be heard. Makes me sad because there is no such mention from number 1 up to the end of the document. Yet, it is these people whom we honor when we sing the responsorial song coming from Psalm 34. The Lord hears the cry of the poor. But we chose. That's not. At the end, I would like to end with this picture used in the poster that is given to you. This was taken in Payatas Dam site, December 18, 2011. And here you see the scavengers sorting out their catch of the day, trying to wash each plastic, trying to weigh them so that they can sell it to get their $10 for that day. The one in violet is one of my students, a young Indonesian man. Usually in these immersions, I tell my scavenger friends, they are here, tell them how you live and how you work. If they need to drink what you drink, let them. Just teach them that. And at the end of the immersion, my scavenger friends told me and said, you know, Father, what I told the sister? I said, yeah, what did you tell her at the end of the day? And he said, Sister, I think you have learned so much. You are very good at what you are doing. So if you decide not to continue with your vocation, you are welcome to Payatas. You are hired. I think he was joking because until now the sister has not decided to get out. She's in Indonesia working. But I think that metaphor tells us what it is to listen to the rough grounds. Because the rough grounds are not afraid to ask painful questions and suggest revolutionary action. I think to do theology from the rough grounds should make us question our theology, rethink our options, and alter our lives. Thank you. that's another lecture. Yeah, the hurricane, typhoon Haiyan. Well, it's like a year ago today.
So they don't have to worry about their homes. I noticed they're built out of stone, so that's good because the hurricanes or typhoons, they don't. But did they do better or worse? Because I didn't hear anything about these particular people on the news.
Yeah. We get international media like when it happened until a month, but they're not there anymore. Anderson Cooper has left like after 3 days. But at the moment, the people on the ground are in fact surviving, rebuilding up their lives. But as you know, it's not easy. Most of them are still in the tents. They have destroyed their homes, of course, and their farms. But I went there like a month after it struck. I was in Manila, that's in the center of the Philippines. But since it's vacation, I volunteered to help there as well. It was touching because when I asked a group of farmers, and we were like having a meeting or some sort of ritual, and I said, so what's in after Haiyan? And one farmer stood up and said, we need to go back to our farms because our farms are totally destroyed. But you know, it was raining, it was like before Christmas, it was raining on Christmas Day, and I was watching from afar a group of farmers beginning to plant. They're back to their farms, even that early after the storm. And it was Christmas Day, I told to myself, well, there are no angels here singing Hallelujah, but I think Christ is born here. In one way or the other, if there is anything, and if there is any word that is prevailing at that, in that place now, it's hope. I don't know how long they can recover. People could. And it's the same word that prevails in Payatas.
If I could ask people to please approach the microphone when they ask questions because we're recording this.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Christides. Nice to see you. Just first of all, on behalf I think of everyone here, heartfelt thank you for let's see, I can talk loud. So thank you for the presentation, but more importantly, thank you for the work that you do in the Philippines and as an academic. I told many of my students, you need to see this guy. And I think in part because, at least in my experience, you instill a sense of hope of what can happen within the church by confronting problems with them and being very honest about those problems and proposing creative new solutions. So thank you for the living testament that you are to all of us. I found very instructive the graph that you had after discussing Milbank and Boff, the See Judge Act circle that you had there. I too share some of your same criticisms, particularly around Boff. Although his work is very important, I think there are some limitations. So my question has to do with the fact that part of your criticism had to do with the way that they were privileging the judge moment of See Judge Act. And I'm wondering perhaps if you can say a little bit about your own constructive proposal and where you see your own work fitting into that process. If I'm understanding you and hearing you correctly, you seem to be arguing that we need a new way of engaging the seeing part of See Judge Act. And if I'm understanding you correctly, the turn to the theological reflexivity has to do with the fact that we need to see that when we do see, this is only one perspective. We need to be aware of multiple perspectives that are seeing the world or experiencing the world in other ways. So I just want to check with you if that's an acceptable interpretation of what you're doing, and is really your work, do you see your work really adding to the conversation of the C part of CWCIT?
Yeah, I think you're right. I have some suggestions on the C part. For instance, in the liberation discourse, liberation theology's discourse, the C part is mainly born out of committed and conscientized Christians from the ground. But Boff was aware of that, but liberation theologians too are aware of that. I think other than committed and conscientized Christians, there are a lot of other Christians who are doing what I call works of resistance, which are not part of conscientized consciousness. Therefore, for instance, I was thinking, when I was studying the word praxis, praxis has been always understood as a movement, way coming from conscientized peoples, Marxists mainly. But I was thinking, how do the work of my father or my grandmother, who has not understood dialectical materialism at all, or haven't heard the word in their lives, figure into the seeing part? Well, Scott, what is this? They call this tactics of the weak, which is outside the main Marxist discourses. But I think the focus of my work is not so much in the seeing. There are a lot of people doing that. The focus of my work is that, in fact, voices from the grounds also influence the judging part. The judging part has always been top-down. Here is the doctrine. See how you can apply it. You can apply it the way you want. You adjust the language, but this is it. My proposal is, can the people's voices also change the doctrine? Can people's experiences also revise, subvert, if you want, how we have formulated our doctrines? And precisely that is what is the intention of theological reflexivity. If we could not even understand what's going on down there in the rough grounds, who are we to say, this is it? In fact, we don't have the last word. Gustavo Gutierrez says, theology is the second act. The first act of which is praxis. Now, that has large ramifications, not only to theology, but also to magisterium, but also to science. Because all of us are professors here. If Einstein says mathematics does not comprehend reality, and if it's certain it's not about reality, then who are we? And what do our theories, how do our theories matter? Therefore, what I'm saying is that maybe there is a constant challenging of theory, of theological theory, of dogmas. And when that happens, it seems that the magisterium is always afraid. And if the theologian thinkers with that, that's the end of you. Now, maybe not in the first world, and not maybe in Europe, but in the Philippines, when most of the bishops are on the right, the theologian is always on the wrong. You know. So it's in one way or the other, it's a little bit dangerous to do this. And so you also navigate. My basic question as a theologian is this. I'm facing these people like every day or every Sunday. And they have their lives. They have their questions. The next question is, how do their questions affect the church in the way it proclaims the message of Jesus? If there is no such opening, then we're dead. I don't know. Thanks, Edith.
Thank you so much for your
presentation, and I think for the effort to think further from here. And of course, I do not have any criticism or critique. I just want to challenge you a little bit to become clearer myself. In a way, I think this juxtaposition of practice, praxis, and theory is misleading in the first place, as if your people on the ground were not judging. They do judge. Yeah. And in that respect, they are already on the side of theory when they reflect on their needs, on the good and bad things they experience, and so on. And likewise, I think the people, the theologians who tend to do theory, they also do practice. And then the question becomes, what is a good practice? What is a right practice? And what is a good theory? And what is a right theory? Because if you read, for example, I'm so sure that you will agree with me, the Instrumentum Laboris, the draft for the Family Synod, you will see that there are so many challenges for families, beginning, and the bishops collected these views, and they're in the document. They are connected to migration. They are connected to, let's say, single mom families. They are connected to sexual violence. They are connected to the poverty. It's all in the document.
Yeah.
And then the interpreters of the document, in the document, say, this is what we can see. They don't know anything about natural law, and we have to become better. It is kind of the comment on the empirical findings of the surveys is offered to us in the same document. And I would say that itself becomes practice. Again, in that respect, it is not just a theory that is abstract from the practice, but it becomes a practice in itself. However, a practice that excludes 98% of the findings in the very survey they comment upon. And so in that respect, I think the juxtaposition between here's the practice or praxis part, here's the theory part, that is misleading. So we need to also take into consideration if, for example, next year the Family Synod comes up with a result, we stick to the prohibition of divorce, but we will be a little bit more merciful. That will become practice and not just judgment, not just theory. And it is discriminatory, and it is certainly not helpful, in my opinion at least. And I think we as theologians also have to say that this theory has an implication for everyone here. So could you weave that into your reflective theology then?
Thanks for your comments, Hilde. I think you're right. No, I think the juxtaposition is a little bit misleading, and in one way or the other, it's simplistic. No? But my intention is it's not so much to critique what they're doing, is to critique what academics are actually doing. Who thinks that theory is the end all of everything, and who are not aware of their practice. In one way or the other, it's non-reflexive practice of theology. So in one way or the other, it's that project that I'm trying to haggle with, no? Because I'm not going to give this lecture to Payatas. No? When I'm there, the people do not need to be lectured on praxis, nor on the theorizing that they are doing. Because if you hear them, and this is one thing that I like, when I'm with them, they just speak their minds out. For instance, in a liturgy, of course I give them time, okay, what do you say about the gospel? And they just say anything. And sometimes it has been long, and one would stand up and say, Father, it's a long time. Can we go home? can we end this? So in one way or the other, I was thinking that, well, people have a theorizing process that's going on in them, and that's not my problem. I am presenting a book, in a way, a concept to theologians who thinks that their theory is the theory, and who are non-reflexive of their practice. So I think you can understand where I am coming from.
Thank you again, Danny. My question is actually whether you think that some of the challenges you identify in the distinction, between Milbank's and Paul's theological approaches are kind of a challenge that is specific to Northern epistemology. So as you are trying to do this hermeneutic of retrieval, are there some autonomous systems, if I, just for lack of a better word, some approaches to doing theology that from the epistemologies of Philippines, that indigenous approach to God talk, how they engage in conversation about God, not just as a matter of theory, but are there some epistemologies from Philippines that fits into your very well considered reflexive approach to doing theology?
Thank you. There are several theologians in the Philippines who are doing theologizing in our own context. There are those who are doing indigenous theologies, theologies from indigenous peoples. There are those doing from language and culture, in one way or the other. But my little contribution into this debate is to clarify a method vis-a-vis the Western academe. Why is this so? Because, well, first of all, I was trained in Western academia. And it seems that in the Western academia, all that we need to do and learn are structures and processes and theories from Western theologians. So I was asking myself the question, so how will they hear from us? In one way or the other, this method is about that entrance towards I call it hegemonic discourse in theology. But there are a lot of other people who are doing more or less real theology from the ground. Some of them are living in indigenous communities. But of course, if you are living on the ground, right, like in the mountains, time for theological reflection and writing is not very possible. So in one way or the other, they are not heard. So my point is maybe, how can a theological method be able to hear? And this methodology is towards that opening. Hopefully in the future, you can get to hear other voices. So this is like a method, but the actual voices are done by other people.
Maybe I went and had a sandwich one floor below at lunch today, and there was a thing on the counter that said, this chocolate bar can change the world. And that sort of language just permeates universities in the United States. Go out and change the world, right? That's the commencement address that every commencement speaker says at graduation, is go out and change the world, right? And I'm wondering if, what do you do? has the world had enough of well-meaning Americans trying to change it? You know, I mean, what do you do? How do you honor what's good in that impulse, and at the same time see that that's not a very humble approach that you talk about? How do we balance that? I mean, when we're at this place, that's what we're about. We want to go out and change the world. How do you deal with that? How do you do that in a way that respects the kind of humility that you're calling us?
Well, if you want to go out and change the world, we welcome you. Because we know that when you are in the ground, we will also change you. Like that picture? I think she has been changed. Unless that contact happens, change is not going to take place. If we have, as Healy says, if we have always separated praxis from theory. So if there is anything, let theory immerse in praxis. And then both changes happen. So I was thinking, if you want to come, you are welcome. In the process, we learn from you, and I hope you also learn from us. They have much to teach us than we ever imagined.
Hi, I also want to thank you for taking your time out to coming and speaking to us. So my question is actually pertaining to part of the answer that you gave to Professor Pierre's question, and the central theme of how can the people's voices change the doctrine. And I guess my question is, how, in your personal experience, what are some strategies or advice that you could give someone like me as an outsider going into these communities to kind of open up that dialogue and open up those conversations of what do you need for your community to change in that way?
Thank you. I think that's a good question, and it has been a question in my mind as well. What do I need to do as a theologian in order to learn from these people? I just hang out with them and listen. That's what I do. After Sunday Masses, which I celebrate, and if they invite me to a birthday party, of course, around the dump site, you're not even sure whether what you're eating is also from the dump site the previous day. It's no problem. And I hang out with them. Just drink with them, sing karaoke with them, etc. And sometimes, I was thinking, someone was asking, do you not take a day off? I said, that's my day off. I'm enjoying there. But in the process, I'm also learning. And I think the stance of being able to learn, listening in order to learn, is important to us. Is important to theological reflexivity. Learning from these who are not in my world, because they break the way before. I was once reflecting on, Healy was doing an issue in Concilium on apocalyptic, and she invited me to write what happens in the high-end areas, in the apocalypse thinking. I was really surprised that with all that's happening, a mother still just sitting on a dead child which is not yet buried. One guy had all his families lost. But the thing that comes out in their mouth is, we will survive this. We will go through this. And I have seen one caption. It says, of course, people from the West are sending like help, etc. And there is one caption in a destroyed house which says, We need house and lot and swimming pool and car. I was thinking, this is like 1 week after the typhoon, and you see the sense of humor. A sign of hope. That this is not the end. The apocalypse is not the end. The apocalypse is in fact after the end. Now that destroyed my apocalyptic whatever framework that I had. Because these people have a different view of things. Other one than what I have seen. So just be there. Hang out and listen.
I do need you mentioned in your talk this encounter with Milbank. And the
Yeah.
question was around being in a religiously diverse or pluralistic
Yeah.
setting. And one of my preoccupations is how religion enters into the conversation in the public arena, one that is growingly pluralistic. So I'm wondering how this theology from the dump site, in one sense, what's your social theory or your theory of how religion engages in political conversation, if you will?
Yeah, it's precisely that. If the arena of theology has been open, it is open to all voices, to any religion for that matter. People in the damn site, they're not all Christians, not Catholics. Some of them Muslims, other I don't know. But precisely in this open conversation, where people can critique and in one way or the other bear out the fallacies of one's position, there I think is what you call public theology is all about. Habermas talks of this, etc. Charles Taylor talks of this. That in fact, well, all voices, including religious, nationalist voices, are welcome. Now, it's another thing, how does this conversation proceed? And that would be the work of theology in the future. How does this conversation actually proceed? But what I'm doing here is just I'm opening up the field, the sacral field, which people think that this is it, this is doctrine, and it does not change. We are only looking for a realistic language. I was thinking, what the hell is that? In one way or the other, it's not about language. It's about rethinking. And these people can help us.
I'm aware that we're getting close to the end and we need to get Danny some dinner, so maybe one or maybe two questions if they're short.
So, thanks very much, Father, for this rich conversation. Now, one comment and then a question. The comment, I was thinking the whole time you were talking about that one statement from the woman in Payatas, please tell the bishops not to be too strict. Mm-hmm. And it struck me that the term listening is the wrong term for that. What would it mean for the bishops or for theologians, even worse, to take that as a moral imperative? And then I think you gave the answer when you said just a minute ago to break one's way of thinking. And it seems clear that that's been your experience, and that's very moving. So the comment, that's the comment. The question, we haven't talked much about action. Being one of those well-meaning Americans who wants to change the world, and my colleagues say I should be in the poli-sci department instead of the religious studies department. Action, in my mind, that is informed by praxis has some degree of strategic character to it. And I'm wondering if one lets one's way of thinking be broken or transformed by the people of Payatas, what do they tell us about strategic action?
Okay. Thank you. Maybe I'm in polemics with close thinking, so I have emphasized listening or breaking whatever frameworks. But it's not also true. I don't think we need to we need to make all the people of Payatas saints. And that's why precisely when you said we would like to change the world in one way or the other, other frameworks from different areas can also help them think of their own ways, rethink their ways, do some strategic action, of which people in the academy might be of help. So in one way, I would like to call it some sort of cross-fertilization. So as they critique us, in one way or the other, the frameworks can also help critique them. And say, okay, you have been doing this, and we know what this is all about. What about, why not try this or something like that? So that dialogue is very important. So since I am in polemics with close thinking from above, I have emphasized that. But I do not want to also say that all that they are doing is the right thing. Maybe there are ways with which they can improve. And maybe, and for all you know, these people are the most open people in the world. Talk about listening. It is them who teaches us how to listen. So they're open to whatever strategic thing we do.
Is there one more question?
Hi. Great lecture. So, I'm not a theologian, but I would like to know, maybe this is a simple question, but it might be a difficult one. So, what do you believe is the aim of theology? And what do you think its role is in the world?
Now that's difficult. What do you believe is the aim of theology? I would say this. I think theology helps make people feel what God tells them in their lives. If theology does not do that, then it's not theology. Because of its jargon, sometimes theology is a field which people are afraid of. We have this program of theology for lay people, and some are beginning to study, and their class or their friends in the parish are saying, "What are you doing in St. Vincent School of Theology every Saturday?" We're taking up theology. And of course, are you going to become a sister or a priest? No. They're afraid. It's not for them. I was thinking, maybe theology, if it's the very relevant, it should be able to speak God in the lives of people. No, that's simple. Sometimes you make it hard because of the theologians. Thank you.